How would you describe the shift which is going on in the world?
Well, there's no question whatsoever that power is shifting from west to east, and the relative positions of Asian powers and European powers have changed significantly. So let me begin with one statistic. In the year 1980, the combined GNP of the European Union was 10 times bigger than China, 10 times. Today, the European Union is about the same size as China. And by 2050, European Union will be half the size of China. So for the European Union to go from being 10 times bigger than China to becoming half the size of China is an indication of how power is shifting dramatically to Asia.
But in the same time, the US economy is doing very well. It is still the largest world economy.
Well, the United States economy was 8 times bigger than the Chinese economy in the year 2000. Now it is only 1.5 times bigger. So even in the relativity between US and China has changed. Of course, but I completely agree with you that the American economy, unlike the European economy, has done well and has grown solidly also. But if you ask me to make a prediction, I would say by 2050, the Chinese economy will still be bigger than the American economy.
But when we discuss Asia, you again start with China. Why don't you see any other power in Asia? Why only has to be China?
Well, you're absolutely right. Actually, I believe that the future growth in Asia is going to come from the new CIA countries. CIA doesn't stand for Central Intelligence Agency. CIA stands for China, India, and ASEAN. And China, India, and ASEAN. ASEAN, by the way, is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. China, India, ASEAN will be the main drivers of growth in Asia. And, if you look at there are 3.5 billion people in the CIA countries. Out of these 3.5 billion people in the year 2000, there were only 150 million people enjoying middle-class living standards. In the year 2000, by 2020, the number had exploded 10 times to 1.5 billion. And by 2030, there might be 2.5 to 3 billion people enjoying middle-class living standards in the CIA countries. So you can see how dramatically the growth story is beyond China. It also covers India and Southeast Asia too. China is the world's oldest continuous civilization, 4,000 to 5,000 years. And China's links with Southeast Asia go back at least 2,000 years. So there are long historical relationships between Southeast Asia and China, and by the way, also with India. And something that may surprise your viewers or listeners is that of the 10 ASEAN countries, Southeast Asian countries, 9 have an Indic base and 1 has a Synic base. So culturally, the Southeast Asian countries are closer to India than they are to China. But today, definitely, China's influence in Southeast Asia is much greater. In fact, China's trade with Southeast Asia in the year 2000 was only $40 billion. But by 2020, that number had reached $975 billion. Can you imagine going from $40 billion in the year 2000 to $975 billion in 2022? And that's amazing, right? An amazing.
So what does it mean for you? What don't you see that that's a domination instead of friendly relationship?
No, well, it's unlike Europe, which doesn't know how to manage its neighboring great powers, we have managed to enjoy good relations with our neighboring great powers. And I'm sure you heard of Vietnam. Vietnam has had a very long relationship with China. And Vietnam has been, by the way, Vietnam was occupied by China only for 1,000 years, right? The Vietnamese understand China. You know what they say in Vietnam? They say that to become the leader of Vietnam, you must be able to stand up to China. And you must
What does it mean? What does it mean?
And you must be able to get along with China.
But what does it mean in practice? How a little Singapore or much larger Vietnam, how you see the right relationship with this giant?
Well, we have, I can tell you, as of now, excellent relations. China's growth has enabled the ASEAN countries to also grow. Let me give you another statistic. In the year 2000, Japan's economy, you mentioned Japan earlier, was eight times bigger than ASEAN's economy. Now Japan is only 1.3 times bigger. By 2030, ASEAN will be bigger than Japan. You know, so what Europeans got to understand is that there's a culture of pragmatism among Asian countries. We don't make loud statements. We don't give speeches. We don't claim we're going to save the world, but we just perform better than any other region in the world. So, you know, there's the Europeans will find it difficult to accept the idea that they should now begin to learn lessons from Asia. But actually, the time has come for Europeans to learn to be as pragmatic as Asian countries, because if Europe does not become pragmatic, it will have a very difficult future ahead for Europe.
What do you mean to be pragmatic from the European side vis-a-vis China?
Oh, not just vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis. It's important for Europe to work out a comprehensive long-term strategy of what are the biggest threats and opportunities for Europe over the next 10 to 20 years or 30 years. And the biggest threat to Europe is going to come from the demographic explosion in Africa, right? In the year 1950, Africa's population was half that of Europe. Today, Africa's population is 2.5 times the size of Europe. By 2100, Africa's population will be 10 times the size of Europe. So you should focus your strategic sights on how you develop Africa. And here, even though Chinese investment in Africa is creating jobs for Africans and keeping Africans in Africa, the Europeans, instead of sending a thank you note to China for saying, thank you, China, for investing in Africa, you are joining the United States in criticizing Chinese investment in Africa when it is against your own interest. You're being unpragmatic. You're sacrificing your own interests, which is bizarre. Why are you doing that? And so, Asians look at Europe and say, 100 years ago, this continent could run the world, right? I mean, the European countries, I know Poland didn't colonize any countries, but, you know, the British, the Dutch, the French, the Belgians, they colonized the world. And today, Europe can't take care of itself, which is a very, very strange. So I think what Europeans need to do is to become a bit more humble and modest and ask itself whether it can learn lessons from other parts of the world on how to manage things.
During this process of learning from you, I still don't understand how you have this pragmatic approach towards much bigger countries, especially China, but also India. So in what way you fit into the ambitions of these countries? India, maybe it's different than China. China, it has been a while, it's projecting very strong ambition to dominate in the region. How do you handle this?
Well, you know, I must emphasize to you that ASEAN just doesn't have ties with China and India. It also has very close ties with the United States of America. And let me give you one statistic that will shock you, okay? The Chinese economy, much bigger than ASEAN's economy. Japan's economy is still bigger than ASEAN's economy. South Korea is, you know, not that big, but Indian economy, same size as ASEAN. Do you know that the United States of America has invested more in Southeast Asia than it has in China, Japan, South Korea, and India combined. Isn't that shocking? So where is Europe? Why is the United States of America investing more in Southeast Asia than China, Japan, South Korea, and India combined, and Europe is not here? So this is what I mean. You got to understand the complexity of Asia. We know how to handle the giants. We have, by the way, also very close relations with Japan. You'll be astonished. So, you must learn the art of being able to handle many different powers who are very different, but with a sophistication and a delicacy that Europeans got to learn. Because you see the world in very black and white terms. The world is becoming a much more complex world. I say that the future of the world will be a 3M world, will be multi-civilizational, multipolar, multilateral. And you know what? The best multi-civilizational laboratory in the world is ASEAN, Southeast Asia. All the major civilizations you can find in Southeast Asia. You can't find them in Europe. Europe only has one civilization. So you got to enter. Europe has now got to change its mind and enter a multi-civilizational world. And you know what? The best place to learn to handle different civilizations is Southeast Asia. So this is quite amazing how ignorant Europe is in general about this region.